My reality got hijacked. Here's what happened. My perception of my work, my world was crumbling. And perception is reality. Maybe you've heard that phrase before. It refers to the assumption that the way I see and experience the world, my reality, that my experience of it is an accurate reflection of how things actually are. And not too long ago, my world felt like it was actually falling apart. But before we get into it, hi. My name's Corey, and I'm an ordained minister, a church planter, and the pastor of RedeemerOnline.Church, the channel that you're watching right now. And it's my mission to help you understand and practice the Christian faith, especially if you don't go to church right now. So if that's something you're interested in, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, the like button, and that notification bell, because that's gonna let you know whenever we put out new videos, and it's gonna let me know that you're here. And I gotta tell you, I'm so glad that you're here. All right, perception is reality. Now, I don't want to get too heady and philosophical with this, so here's what I mean, real quick. The other day, I was feeling quite anxious and depressed about my work and my impact in the world. My work was feeling pointless, I was feeling hopeless about the future, and not just my own future, by the way, especially the future for upcoming generations. It made me want to just throw in the towel with it all. And that night at dinner, I also started telling Alana about this new book I was reading. It was called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. The book essentially lays out the harms of a phone-based childhood and makes the argument that social media is directly responsible for the mental health crisis amongst Gen Z individuals. You see, what happened was I had been immersing myself in all this negative data about social media and the online world and all of the harm that has been created as a result. And it was causing me to feel hopeless, to feel helpless. My perception of my work and my world was crumbling. And perception is reality, right? Well, as my wonderful wife pointed out from across the dinner table, my perception was being influenced by my inputs, namely the book that I was reading. And so she opted kindly to add some more inputs. She reminded me of all the good that's come as a result of RedeemerOnline.Church and the people that have been helped in meaningful ways that I wasn't taking into account in my mind. So although perception is reality, that perception is largely influenced, sometimes negatively hijacked, by my inputs, by what I'm listening to or what I'm reading, the books, the podcasts, the TV shows, the news stations, and yes, whatever the social media algorithm serves up to keep my attention. But that also means, to some degree, that I'm in charge of my inputs. I'm in charge of choosing what will influence my perception of reality. I'm capable of questioning my perception and examining my inputs. I mean, why do I think the way I think? Why am I perceiving reality this way? How are my inputs influencing my experience of the world? You know, Jesus makes this really odd statement in the Gospel of John, but it's really relevant to this conversation. He says, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep." That doesn't sound relevant. Well, stay with me because there's a few layers to this. Jesus was having this argument with the religious leaders of his day, and he was essentially calling them out as being like bad shepherds of God's flock, God's people. He starts by giving them this really weird sheep pen parable. "Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The only one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they'll never follow a stranger. In fact, they'll run away from him because they don't recognize a stranger's voice." Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees didn't understand what he was telling them, which is fair. I mean, this is kind of a weird parable to tell. I mean, yes, we get it. Sheep know the voice of their own shepherd. They're probably not going to listen to the voice of a different shepherd. But what does that have to do with literally anything? So to clear it up, Jesus continues and says, "I am the gate for the sheep," which doesn't exactly clear it up. At least not for us. And that's because, like I said, there's a few layers of meaning going on here that this original audience would have understood immediately. The first layer has to do with the Old Testament background. It has to do with the past. In Ezekiel 34, a couple hundred years before Jesus' time, the prophet Ezekiel, on behalf of God, specifically called out the religious leaders of Israel for being bad shepherds. And in particular, He calls out the shepherds for taking advantage of the flock, essentially robbing the sheep. You could say, fleecing them. Come on, man. So when Jesus references anyone who enters the sheep pen through an alternative route other than the gate, when he calls them a thief and a robber, it's a call back to the past, to that Ezekiel judgment. A shepherd who doesn't enter through the gate is not to be trusted. The second layer of meaning has to do with the present. Jesus makes a claim here and now in that moment that he is the gate, that in order to gain access to the sheep, the religious leaders should go through him. But since the religious leaders of his day opposed and rejected him, Jesus was suggesting that they've given up their access to the people. Then they've abdicated their ability to lead people to life and life to the full, to pasture, to the good life. And those are fighting words. Jesus says, you're not just leading the people poorly, you're actually a thief who's here to steal and kill and destroy. But I'm here so that people will find life and life in abundance. I'm the gateway to that life. How? How is Jesus the gate? Well, because Jesus will delineate for people between thief and legitimate shepherd. That's what Jesus means when he says, I am the gate. Which is exactly what was happening in the present. People started ignoring the religious leaders and rallying around Jesus. It's kind of why they had him killed. Okay, past, present, now the future, the third layer of meaning. Of all the stories about Jesus that John, the author of this gospel, could have told, why do you think he chose this one? Well, we actually have a few of the letters that John wrote to the churches that he helped start in the first century. And in those letters, it's clear that they face some stressors threatening to tear their communities apart. One of those stressors was about who to trust in leadership, who to trust as an influencer in their community. All kinds of people were claiming to speak and lead on behalf of God. They all demanded influence. So the third layer of meaning here is that John includes this story because it addresses the question of leadership and influence. Who should his flock listen to? Who should they be wary of? Jesus is your standard for who to give influence to. John wants his community, his flock, to ignore the voice of anyone who tries to influence them in an anti-Jesus way. Don't get fleeced by people who want something from you. Jesus brought something for you, life and life to the full. All right. So what's the takeaway for us? Jesus is the gate. Remember that perception is reality, but your perception is influenced by your inputs, and you can examine and question and change your inputs. Jesus came so that you might have life and life to the full. He came to offer something for you. Beware of those inputs that demand something from you. Am I saying that, you should only ever listen to Christian inputs then? No, definitely not. But I am saying that when it comes to your soul, let Jesus be the gate by which you vet your shepherds. Let Christ-likeness be your measuring stick for the primary influences in your life. And don't do it because I said so. Don't even do it because someone told you to, or even because of what an ancient author wrote down. Do it to find out for yourself if it really does lead to life and life to the full. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.